An engineer from Chicago picks up the Baron's decree and within 10 seconds sees what the whole village fails to notice. Someone has scraped off the original figures and written in new ones. The tax has doubled. And now the Baron will send men not after the village, after whoever noticed this. But let's rewind. The first thing Daniel Reyes feels is the taste of dirt. The earth crunches between his teeth. Rain lashes the back of his head with icy needles. He's lying in a muddy rut and doesn't remember how he got here. A second ago there was an intersection, headlights, a crash, the smell of engine oil, and now mud and cold that makes his fingers go numb. He sits up, feels himself over. His hands are intact. His legs are intact. His head hurts, but his bones are in place. A wooden box lies nearby. His spare parts. The very parts he was carrying from the workshop. Only now the plastic case has turned into an oak frame with copper hinges. The chrome has become brass. The axles smell not of oil, but of beeswax. Daniel takes out a single part and holds it up to his eyes. A brass letter. A raised letter A at the end. He recognizes the shape instantly. A hand-cast piece from the 15th century. Rough but functional. He counts them. 34 letters. Axles, guides, a spring. All of this comes together into the simplest of printing mechanism. Slow, primitive, but functional. And this is where the strangest part begins. Someone has turned his auto parts into a printing press kit. Daniel stands up. His knees are shaking from the cold. His wet jeans cling to his body. Ordinary clothes for an ordinary Tuesday in Chicago. Only there is no Chicago around him. No streetlights, no wires, no asphalt. A forest to the left, a field to the right. Wheel tracks and hoof prints. He speaks calmly aloud. If it's a coma, panic won't help. If it's death, all the more so. And then a wagon emerges from the darkness. Wooden. The wheels are shod with iron. On the driver's seat, a farmer in a leather sleeveless jacket. A real one, not from a museum. He pulls on the reins and says something in a language that sounds like a mix of German and Slavic. Daniel doesn't understand a word. He gestures. Give me a ride. The peasant nods toward the back of the cart. They drive through the rain for an hour. Daniel takes in the details. A mixed forest. A dirt road without gravel. Wooden bridges on stone supports. The 13th century, he guesses. Maybe the 14th. A light flickers ahead. A village. 20 houses with thatched roofs. Ox bladders instead of glass in the windows. The cart pulls up to a 2-story house with a sign. A jug and a bed. An inn. It's warm inside. The first pleasant fact in an hour of his new life. A stone hearth. Long tables. By the fire, a woman is stirring something in the cauldron. She turns around. A broad face. Dark hair under a scarf. Brown eyes that see right through him. A peasant quickly says something to her. She nods and sets a bowl of porridge with meat and a mug of warm broth in front of Daniel. He eats and watches. The woman runs the dining hall like a well-oiled machine. She refills. She nods. She clears away. She wipes down. Not a single wasted movement. An engineer's mind, Daniel thinks, only applied to a tavern. He finishes eating. He has no money, so he'll have to work it off. And then he hears a sound coming from behind the wall. A rhythmic tapping, a click with every turn. Not a good one. Daniel knows that sound. That's how a gear with a chipped tooth knocks. He stands up. Points at the wall, at his ear, draws a circle with his hand. Problem. The woman leads him to the back room. A hand-cranked grain mill, 2 millstones, a gear between the handle and the upper stone. One tooth is chipped at the base. The handle slips, and the whole contraption jerks. 10 minutes of work. The woman brings a rough tool, a hammer, chisel, file. Daniel files down the adjacent teeth so the transition is smooth. The mill will lose some power, but will stop damaging itself. He turns the handle, smoothly, no clicking. The woman tries it herself, nods, extends her hand, a firm handshake, points to her chest. Martha. He says his name. She repeats it with an accent. Daniel. That'll do. She leads him upstairs to a small room. A bed, a trunk, dry and warm. He's alive. He has a roof over his head, a name in this world, and 34 brass letters. Someone really wanted him to work, Daniel thinks. Well then, he's an engineer. Work is what he does best. The morning dawns gray. A rooster crows. Daniel opens his eyes and sees a thatched roof. The fourth possibility has been confirmed. He goes downstairs. In the hall, seated at a table, is a gray-haired old man with the face of someone to whom everyone is indebted. The village elder. He holds a scroll in his hands, genuine parchment with a red wax seal. The old man unrolls it and reads aloud. Peasants stream into the hall. Their faces darken. A woman gasps. A man by the wall clenches his fists. It is a decree, an order from the authorities. Martha stands by the hearth with the cold composure of someone who is angry but keeping her cool. Daniel points to the scroll. "Can I take a look?" Martha asks the village elder. He grumbles but hands over the parchment. And this is where the engineer does what he was brought here for. He cannot read the local language, but he doesn't need to. For 20 years, he has worked with mechanisms where precision is measured in tenths of a millimeter. He sees what others do not notice. And now he sees 3 spots where the surface of the parchment is different, smoother, lighter. The fibers lie differently. The ink has soaked in deeper because the top layer was scraped off. Someone scraped off the original and wrote over it. The document is 700 years old, and it's only still valid because no one checks it. Daniel calls Martha over. He runs his fingernail over the clean spot, then over the scraped area. The difference is obvious to the touch. Martha touches it herself. She frowns. She looks at the foreman. She calls someone. A pale guy with ink stains on his fingers walks in. A former scribe's apprentice. You can tell by his hands. Martha points his nose to the same spots. The guy stares intently and turns even paler. His voice trembles as he speaks. Daniel doesn't understand the words, but gets the gist. The original said one thing. The forgery says another. The numbers have been changed. The yield has increased. Someone between the monastery and the village scraped off the real numbers and wrote in new ones. By noon, the whole village knows. People come. They touch the parchment. They leave angry. It is the anger of people who have suspected deception their whole lives and have finally received proof. Martha sits down across from Daniel and says a sentence from which he catches only his own name. He guesses the rest from her tone. "Who are you?" "Good question," he thinks. "I'm an engineer from Chicago. I can tell when metal lies. And apparently, when parchment lies too." By evening, everything changes. The Baron has learned that the village has found out. People are no longer just angry. They're scared. Martha moves more sharply, faster. She's getting ready. Late at night, she comes to his room. With her is a pale scribe and 3 sturdy peasants. She points to the door, to the road, to the south, then at Daniel, and he understands. The Baron will send men not for the village, for whoever found the forgery, for him. Martha suggests they leave, and leave together. Daniel looks at the box of letters, at Martha, at the clerk, at the 3 peasants. 6 people, 1 box of brass letters. No money, no plan. He picks up the box and nods. They leave the village before dawn. Martha leads the way. The pale young man walks beside her and names things. A tree, a stone, water, road. The first words of a new language. Daniel repeats and memorizes. 20 years of work where every screw has a name have taught him to catch terms on the first try. They walk all day. By evening, they reach the foothills. In a ravine between the hills stands an old mill. The roof has sagged. The wheel has rotted. But the walls are stone and thick. Daniel goes inside. It's spacious, dry in the corner. A room the size of his garage in Chicago. He sets the box on a stone ledge and opens it. 34 letters glimmer dimly in the last light of day. Martha looks over his shoulder. He takes A, then B, then C. She doesn't understand. Daniel smiles for the first time in 2 days. He can't explain it in words yet, but he'll show her through his actions. The future lies in this box. Not his. Theirs. Everyone's. It's just that for now, he's the only one who knows. For the first week at the mill, Daniel didn't touch the letters. It was the hardest decision, but the only right one. Survival first, then inventions. The mill stood in a clearing between the hills and wasn't visible from the main road. A stream ran 20 paces away. The forest began behind the hill. The stone walls were thick and held the heat if a fire was lit inside. Martha took charge of the household so naturally that no one even discussed it. She organized 3 young men to gather firewood and repair the roof. The pale young man with ink-stained hands was named Thomas Wind, a former novice of the Order of the Bright Word. He had left the monastery 2 years ago and ended up in Quietford. He could read and write in 3 dialects, and he became Daniel's voice. Every evening they sat by the fire, and Thomas taught him the language. Daniel hung on every word. After 3 days, he could ask for water and bread. After 5 days, he could explain a simple thought. After 10, he could carry on a slow conversation with pauses and gestures. The language of Alderaan was like late Latin crossed with Germanic roots, logical in grammar, difficult to pronounce. But Daniel was used to memorizing complex technical terms and treated the new words like the parts of a machine. Each word was a cog. Put it in the right place, and the mechanism would work. On the 8th day, he spoke for the first time in a way that was understood without having to be asked to repeat himself. He told Martha that the porridge was better today than yesterday. Martha snorted and replied that the porridge was the same every day. It was just that his taste had finally become local. The 3 farmhands stuck together. The oldest was named Rick. He was broad-shouldered and taciturn. The middle one, Olaf, was red-haired and nervous and constantly asked if it was time to go back. The youngest, Gunther, was the calmest of the 3 and the only one who approached Daniel on his own initiative. Gunther looked at the letters as if they were a miracle. He couldn't read, but he was fascinated by the very idea that pieces of metal could become words. Daniel explained the structure of the letters to him and watched the boy's eyes widen. On the 10th day, Daniel decided it was time. He gathered everyone in the mill hall. 6 people sat in a semicircle on stones and logs. Daniel stood before them and, with Thomas's help, began to speak. Slowly, in simple words. He said that he had knowledge, not magic, not sorcery. Knowledge of how to make identical letters out of metal. How to arrange them in a row. How to press them against paper and produce text. Identical text. As many times as he wanted. 10 copies. 100 copies, 1,000. He saw their faces. Martha watched intently, but without surprise. She didn't yet grasp the scale of it. Thomas did. He turned pale again. His hands were shaking. He had spent his entire youth in a monastery, where a single scribe had copied a single book for 3 years. 3 years for a single book. And this man was talking about 100 copies. Thomas asked in a whisper, "Is that really possible?" Daniel said yes, but not right away, and not alone. He needs a blacksmith, a good blacksmith who knows how to work with small details. He needs someone who knows where to get tin and lead. He needs paper, lots of paper, and ink. But not the water-based ink the monks use, but oil-based ink, thick and sticky. He needs linseed oil. He needs soot. He needs wood for the press. He needs a lot of things, and all of it costs money they don't have. Martha listened to the list and nodded after each item. When he finished, she asked one thing. "If you do this, if this machine works, what will we print first?" Daniel answered without hesitation. The law. That very land code by which the lords collect their taxes. The real one, unedited, so that every peasant could hold it in their hands and know what was actually written. Martha was silent for a few seconds. Then she stood up and said she knew a blacksmith. His name is Jonas Bergman. He lives 2 days' journey south in the village of Everbeck. A good craftsman. He makes locks and hinges for the whole region. He has a daughter and no wife, and he drinks. but he has golden hands. That's what Martha said. Golden hands. Daniel and Rick set out for Everbeck the next morning. 2 days' journey along forest trails. Rick knew the way and carried a bag of food on his back without asking any questions. Daniel appreciated that. Everbeck turned out to be bigger than Quiet Crossings. 40 houses, a small market. The blacksmith shop stood on the edge of the village, and you could hear it from 300 paces away, the clang of metal, rhythmic and confident. Daniel went inside and saw Jonas, a big man, not fat, but big. A broad chest and arms like logs, and a black apron scorched in a dozen places. A girl stood next to him by the anvil, about 20, maybe a little older, dark hair tied in a knot. Her hands were burned. She was holding a workpiece with tongs and looked at Daniel with an expression that clearly said she didn't like uninvited guests. It was Lena. Daniel greeted her in his still clumsy Alderanian and said he'd come on business. Jonas set down his hammer, wiped his hands on his apron, asked what kind. Daniel took a liter out of his bag, placed it on the anvil. Jonas picked it up, turned it over in his hands, brought it up to his eyes, and Daniel saw the same look he'd seen in Martha's eyes when she touched the gear. A craftsman's recognition. Jonas didn't know what it was, but he could see the quality of the work. He could see that the letter was cast from a mold, that the alloy was unusual, that the letter at the end was carved precisely and deeply. He asked what it was. Daniel explained, briefly, without unnecessary details. Metal letters, arranged in a row, pressed against paper. The result is text, identical every time. He needed more of these letters, many more, the entire alphabet, several of each, and they had to be identical, not similar, but identical. Every letter A is exactly the same as every other letter A, down to the last 0.1%. Jonas listened and scratched his beard. Then he asked what to cast them from. Daniel said an alloy, tin, lead, a little antimony. He gave the exact proportions. 4 parts lead, 1 part tin, a small part antimony. He explained the purpose of each component. Lead provides weight and softness. Tin lowers the melting point and makes the surface smooth. Antimony adds hardness so the letter doesn't crumple on impact. Pure lead is too soft. Pure tin is too brittle. Only an alloy. Jonas listened, and his expression changed. He didn't understand why, but he understood how, and that hooked him. He was a master, and a master was being offered a new challenge, a challenge that no one before him had tackled. Lena stood nearby and listened in silence. She didn't ask a single question, but she didn't leave. And Daniel noticed how she was looking at the letter in her father's hands, eagerly, like a man who had spent his whole life making horseshoes and hinges and suddenly saw that his craft could be something greater. Jonas said he'd think about it. Daniel said he understood. He left the letter as a sample. He and Rick left and spent the night in the woods. They returned in the morning. Jonas was waiting for them at the smithy. He hadn't slept all night. The letter lay on the anvil, new, cast by Jonas overnight, rough, a bit crooked. The letter wasn't an A, but a B, or the local equivalent. Daniel picked it up and compared it to his own. The difference was immediately apparent. His letter was precise. Jonas's letter was approximate. But it was there. It existed. The first letter cast in Alderaan by the hands of a local craftsman. Daniel showed Jonas the difference. Here, the stem is a hair thicker. Here, the letter is slightly tilted. Here, the edge is uneven. And he explained why it mattered. If the letters are different, they won't line up straight. The line will shift. The letters will jump around. The text will become unreadable. Every letter must be a copy. Not similar, but an exact copy. For that, you need a mold, a matrix. One mold for each letter. And from that mold, you can cast as many identical letters as you want. Jonas listened and nodded. Lena listened and didn't nod. She walked over to the anvil and picked up her father's letter. She turned it over in her fingers. She looked at Daniel's letter. And she spoke the first words Daniel had ever heard from her. She needed a copper mold to carve the letter into copper, to pour the alloy into the mold. Then every casting would be identical. Daniel looked at her. In 30 seconds, she had articulated what had taken Gutenberg years. The principle of matrix casting, the very foundation of the printing trade. And this girl, with her burned hands, had figured it out just by looking at 2 letters. He said yes. Exactly. A copper mold. Lena nodded and went into the smithy. 3 hours later, she returned with the first matrix. Rough. Carved from a scrap of copper with a chisel and a small hammer. The letter A. Mirrored. Just as it should be. Daniel looked at this matrix and felt something shift inside him. The first step. The first real step. Not his own, but one taken by someone from this world. Someone who had seen the idea and seized upon it. They spent 4 days in Averbeck. Daniel drew the blueprints in charcoal on boards. Jonas and Lena worked, casting after casting. The first batch was half defective. The letters came out either too thick or too thin. The alloy was capricious. The temperature was off. Jonas got angry and threw the defective castings into a bucket. Lena didn't get angry. She just redid them, over and over. By the end of the 4th day, they had 12 usable letters. 12 out of the 38 needed for the complete Alderon alphabet. Daniel said he'd be back in 2 weeks and that he needed a full set, at least 5 of each letter, and 10 more of the most common ones. Jonas asked how he'd pay for the tin and lead. Daniel didn't know. He had no money. Martha gave him 5 copper coins and a bag of dried meat for the road. That was all they had. Jonas looked at his daughter. Lena looked at her father. Something passed between them without words. Jonas said he would borrow the tin from a merchant in Averbeck, in his own name, because he was curious, because after 40 years of working in the smithy, this was the first time he'd been offered a task that kept him awake at night. Daniel shook his hand. Lena didn't offer her hand. She just nodded and went back to the anvil. The return trip took 2 days. Daniel walked and thought. He had a team of 6 people at the mill, a blacksmith and his daughter 2 days' journey away, 12 typefaces, and not a single sheet of paper, not a drop of ink, not a single board for the press. Months of work ahead, maybe years. He returned to the mill by evening. Martha met him at the entrance. She looked at his face and asked, "Well, how did it go?" Daniel replied that the blacksmith had agreed. Martha nodded. Then she said that while he was gone, she had been thinking. She needed a paper business. She remembered that in her youth, her father used to take linen rags to the mill for a paper maker in the West. An old master. Maybe he's still alive. Paper. For a second, Daniel forgot that he couldn't speak the local language properly and blurted out a single word in English. Exactly. Martha didn't understand the word, but understood his expression. She smiled. It was the first time in the 2 weeks he'd known her. Her teeth were strong and even. The smile made her look 5 years younger. Daniel caught himself thinking that it was beautiful. Then he pushed the thought away. Not the time. He went into the mill. He took a piece of coal and began to draw on the wall. A sketch. The first real sketch of a printing press. The press, the shaft, the frame, feed mechanism, bed, pressure lever. He drew for 3 hours. Thomas sat nearby and watched. Gunther stood behind him, holding his breath. Olaf sat by the door, nervously scratching the back of his head. Rick was sharpening a knife. When Daniel finished, the mill wall was covered with a complete drawing of a printing press. A primitive one, missing half the parts needed for it to function properly, but a working one, theoretically functional. Martha walked up to the wall and stared at the drawing for a long time. Then she turned to him and said, "Do you really believe this will amount to anything?" Daniel replied, "I don't believe it." "I know, because it's already been done, somewhere else, at another time, and it changed the whole world." Thomas translated for those who didn't understand. Martha looked at Daniel for a long time. Then she said, "All right, tomorrow we'll go see the papermaker." The papermaker's name was Otto Craig. He lived halfway west of the mill in a cabin by the river everyone called the Muddy. The name was well deserved. The river carried reddish, clay-colored water and smelled of iron. Martha and Daniel set out at dawn. Thomas went with them because Daniel's vocabulary was still too limited for a serious conversation. They walked along a path through the forest. Martha walked confidently ahead. She had known these places since childhood. She told stories along the way. Her father was a cart driver. He hauled goods between villages, rags to the paper mill, wool to the spinners, iron from blacksmiths to fairs. She had grown up on a wagon and knew every road in the area within a 2 days' journey. Daniel listened and memorized, not just words, routes, distances, who lived where and what they traded. A map of the area took shape in his mind like a blueprint. By noon they came to a hut, or rather, to what had once been a workshop. A long building by the river, a stone foundation, wooden walls darkened by moisture, a large water wheel on the side of the building. It wasn't turning. The blades were half rotten. Daniel saw the remains of vats for soaking, wooden drying frames, screens, presses, everything in disrepair, everything familiar. He had seen such workshops in photographs in books on the history of papermaking. The process hadn't changed for centuries. Rags are soaked, ground into a pulp. The pulp is diluted with water, scooped up with a screen. The water drains off. A thin layer of fibers remains. It dries. It is pressed. Paper. Otto Craig came out of the hut when they approached the door, an old man. 60 or 70 years old, as dry as a stick. His back was bent. His hands were long and gnarled. His eyes were watery and distrustful. He didn't recognize Martha at first. Then he did, and his face softened slightly. Cain, the cart driver's daughter. Martha nodded. They went inside. The hut smelled of dampness and mold. Otto lived alone. The workshop hadn't been in operation for 5 years, maybe more. He explained why. The monastery of the Order of the Bright Word, 2 days' journey to the north, had taken all his customers. The monastery had its own paper mill, bigger, better, with a dozen workers. Otto couldn't compete. First he lost the big orders, then the small ones. Then he stopped making paper altogether. He lives off fishing and his garden. Daniel listened through Thomas and nodded. Then he asked to see the workshop. Otto led him inside. Daniel examined every vat, every frame, every tool. Most of it was in poor condition, but repairable. The wood could be replaced, the nets restrung, the press repaired, the water wheel rebuilt. The most important thing was still there, the stone millstones for grinding rags. They don't rot or rust. Daniel turned to Otto and asked through Thomas, "If you had a client, a steady one, lots of paper, every month, could you do it?" Otto looked at him for a long time. Then he asked, "How much?" Daniel said, 500 sheets a month to start, then more." Otto whistled. 500 sheets is 2 months' work for one person, even with an assistant. Daniel said he'd provide assistance, too, and he'd fix the wheel. The wheel is the key. Without it, the rags have to be ground by hand. With the wheel, the process is 10 times faster. Otto thought it over. Then he asked how he would be paid. That question again. Daniel had no money. He looked at Martha. Martha looked at Otto and said something long and fast. Thomas couldn't keep up with the translation. Daniel caught only the gist. Martha was offering a share. Not payment, but a share in the business. Otto would not be a hired hand, but a partner. When the paper went into production and the business began to turn a profit, Otto would get his cut. The old man was silent. Daniel could see him thinking, weighing his options. 5 years without work. The workshop is falling apart. His hands long for a project. And now people come and say they need his paper, that they need him. For the old master, that meant more than money. Otto said, okay, but on one condition. He wanted to see what his paper would be used for. Daniel said he'd show him, when there was something to show. They left by evening. On the way back, Daniel was silent, doing the math in his head. The blacksmith in Averbeck makes letterpresses. The papermaker by the muddy river makes paper. There's room for a machine in the mill. 3 problems remain: ink, a press, and money for all of this. He could figure out the ink himself, theoretically. He needs soot for the pigment. Soot can be obtained from a resinous tree. Pine will do. Collect soot on a cold surface above the fire. Slow, but doable. He needs linseed oil, boiled flaxseed oil. Flaxseed oil can be pressed from flax seeds. Flax grows everywhere in Alderaan. He'd seen flax fields on the road to Averbeck. Linseed oil is flaxseed oil heated to a boil and aged. It thickens and becomes sticky, the perfect base for printing ink. Water-based ink won't do. It bleeds into the letters and produces a smudged impression. Oil-based ink clings to the surface of the paper and transfers clearly to the paper. It was one of those things Daniel knew by heart, the difference between water-based and oil-based ink. In his world, it was a detail from a textbook. In this world, it was secret knowledge worth more than gold. The press was more complicated. A screw was needed, a large wooden screw, or a metal, but a metal one would cost a fortune. A wooden one is more realistic. A grape press uses the same principle. If they make wine on Alderaan, that means they're a craftsman who carve wooden screws. He asked Martha. She said they make wine in the south. There are a couple of vineyards in the foothills. Daniel nodded. A wooden screw, an oak frame, a lever, a movable plate. All of this can be made from wood and a minimum of iron. A carpenter and one day's work at the forge. Money was the biggest problem. Without money, there's no tin for the letters, no linseed oil for ink, no rags for paper, no food for the workers while they labor. Daniel thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, Martha came to him herself with a solution. She had savings, hidden from everyone in a secret cache in Quiet Broads. Her late husband had left her 12 silver marks sewn into the lining of his old coat. She had been saving them for a rainy day. It doesn't get any rainier than this, she said. It was the only money she had ever had in her life. She suggested putting it all in. Daniel was silent. 12 silver marks. He didn't yet fully understand local prices, but he knew that a silver mark was roughly a craftsman's monthly earnings. 12 marks. A year's work. All that was left of her husband. All that protected her from poverty. He told her that if this didn't work out, she would lose everything. Martha looked at him and said that she had already lost everything when she left Quiet Crossings. The house, the inn, the farm, everything was left behind there. 12 marks is all she and the only thing she could bet on. She's betting on him. Daniel took the money and promised himself he'd pay her back 100-fold, or die trying. They divided it up like this. 4 marks to Jonas for tin, lead, and antimony. 3 marks to Otto for rags and workshop repairs. 2 marks for linseed oil, soot, and other expenses. 3 marks for food for everyone for 3 months. Just enough. Not a single extra coin. Not a single backup plan. The next month was hell. A beautiful, terrible hell. Daniel worked 18 hours a day. In the morning, he drew blueprints. In the afternoon, he went into the forest for resinous branches to make soot. In the evening, he boiled linseed oil. At night, he studied the language. Thomas became his shadow. He translated. He explained. He wrote down everything Daniel said. Thomas had beautiful, clear handwriting and absolute precision with words. A former novice. Years of training. But Thomas was tormented. Daniel could see it. Every time the conversation turned to printing and copying texts, Thomas's face would change. He believed that the word was sacred, that every letter transcribed by a monk's hand carried within it a part of the divine plan. And a machine is just iron. Can iron carry grace? He asked Daniel about this one night by the fire. Could a printed word be as real as one written by hand? Daniel thought for a moment. Then he answered, When you write a word by hand, you put your labor into it. 3 years for a single book. That's beautiful. That's worthy of respect. But what if the book is needed not by one person, but by 1,000? 1,000 monks, 3 years each. 3,000 years of labor for 1,000 books. Or 1 machine and 3 months. The sacredness isn't in the hand that writes. The sacredness lies in the word that is read. Thomas was silent for a long time. Then he said that this was heresy, and that he would think about it. Daniel smiled. Heresy that is thought about is no longer heresy. It is a question. By the end of the month, the linseed oil was ready. A thick, dark, oily liquid with a pungent odor. Daniel mixed it with soot he had been collecting for 2 weeks. The result was a black paste. Printing ink. Primitive, rough, but functional. He applied the paste to one of his original letters. He pressed it against a scrap of linen. He lifted it. The letter A remained on the fabric. Clear, black, legible. He showed it to Martha. Martha stared at the imprint for a long time. A single letter on a scrap of cloth. Nothing special to someone from Daniel's world. But Martha looked as if she were seeing fire for the first time. She reached out and touched the letter. The ink had already dried. The letter hadn't smudged. Martha said quietly, "It's the same. The letter, just like on parchment. But you didn't write it. You pressed it." Daniel nodded. 1 press, 1 second. Now imagine 100 presses, 1,000. Martha was silent. Then she took her hand off the fabric and said she needed to breathe. She left the mill and stood outside for 10 minutes. When she returned, her eyes were red. She didn't say anything. She just brought him dinner and sat down next to him. Gunther, who had seen it all, asked Daniel to show him again. Daniel showed him. Then he let Gunther try it himself. The guy pressed the letter against the fabric so gently, it was as if it were made of glass. He lifted it. He saw the letter. His mouth opened and stayed open for a minute. Then he asked, "Can I have a whole word?" Daniel said, "Not yet. Not yet." There was no frame to hold the letters in a row. But soon. Soon. Another month passed. 2 months had gone by since Daniel woke up in the mud on the road. 2 months, and the world around him had begun to change. Not the world of Alderaan, his own world, the world inside the mill. Jonas had sent a bag with Gunther. Inside the bag lay the letters, 180 of them. The entire Alderaan alphabet, with 5 copies of each letter and 10 of the most common ones. Daniel poured them out onto a stone table and sorted them for 2 hours. The quality was uneven. About a third of the castings were perfect. Smooth edges, precise height, clear lettering. These were Lena's letters. Daniel had already learned to tell them apart. Jonas cast with sweeping strokes, with force. His letters were slightly rougher, sturdy but imprecise. Lena cast carefully, patiently. Her letters were precise to the 1/10 of a millimeter. The difference between a master who has been working for 40 years and a master who works to prove he has the right to work. Another third were usable after filing. Daniel filed them himself, with a file. Every letter, half an hour per piece. Monotonous work, familiar. Similar to restoring old typewriters. The same precision, the same patience, the same smell of metal. The last third went to be remelted. He returned them to Gunther with detailed notes. This one is 1/4 of a line too high. This one is crooked along the axis. This letter is shifted to the left. Gunther memorized the notes and took them back to Jonas. A rhythm had settled in between the mill and the forge. Once a week, Gunther made the round trip. 2 days one way, 2 back. 3 days on site while Jonas and Lena cast the next batch. The guy didn't complain. He liked walking better than sitting. Otto was working too. Rick and Olaf went to help him. They repaired the water wheel, they fixed the vats, they collected rags from the surrounding villages. Martha made a deal with 2 peasant women for a copper coin a week so they would bring old linen cloth, worn-out shirts, rags, burlap, anything that could be boiled down into a pulp and turned into a sheet of paper. The first batch of paper arrived 3 weeks later. 20 sheets. Daniel took the first one and held it up to the light. Thick, uneven, lumpy. The surface was rough and fibrous, but it was paper, real paper. He ran his finger over it. Then he applied a drop of ink. The ink soaked in too quickly. It spread. The letter smudged. The paper was too loose, not sized. For letterpress printing, you need a surface that holds the ink on top rather than pulling it in. Daniel knew the solution: sizing. In his world, printing paper was sized with animal glue or starch. Here, he could use the same method. Boil bones or hide for glue. Dilute it in water. Dip the sheets. Dry them. The surface would become denser. The ink would hold. He explained this to Otto on his next visit. The old man listened and nodded. He knew about sizing. He used to do it for high-end orders. He simply stopped because regular customers didn't care. They wrote with quill pens and water-based ink, for which loose paper was suitable. But for printing, yes, sizing was necessary. Otto began sizing the paper. The next batch was better. The ink laid down evenly. The letters remained crisp. Daniel exhaled. A small victory. One of dozens needed before the machine would work. The press was the next task, and the biggest one. Daniel found a carpenter. Martha brought him over. His name was Bernard, an old, quiet man from a village an hour's walk away. He made barrels and furniture. He worked with oak like a poet with words. Daniel explained to him what was needed: an oak frame, sturdy, chest high, a flat plate at the bottom, a movable plate on top, space for a sheet of paper between them, and most importantly, a screw. A large wooden screw that presses the top plate down. Bernard listened and looked at the sketch on the mill wall. Then he said he'd made great presses and knew how to cut a screw, but never one this big. Daniel said the principle was the same, only more precise. The pressure had to be even across the entire plate. Otherwise, the impression will be sharp in the center and blurred at the edges. Bernard thought. Then he said he'd try. He needed oak, good, dry oak, and time. 3 weeks at least. Daniel agreed. 3 weeks for the press. By then, he would have enough type and paper for the first print. While Bernard worked on the press, Daniel tackled another task: the composing stick, the frame that holds the type in a row. In the printing houses of his world, it was a simple wooden frame with grooves. The type was inserted into the grooves one by one, letter by letter, word by word. A space was inserted between the words, an empty piece of metal the same height as the type, but without a letter. The line was set from left to right, then the next line, and the next, until the entire frame was filled. Then the frame was secured with wedges so the letters wouldn't shift. Inked. A sheet was placed, pressed down, lifted, a print. Daniel made his first typesetting case himself, from scraps of oak, with a knife and a file. 4 evenings of work, rough, uneven, but functional. The letters fit into the groove and stood straight. Not perfect, but straight. He set the first word. He didn't choose it by chance. He thought about it for 3 days. The first word printed in Alderaan. It had to be right. Not pretentious, not beautiful. Right. He chose the word law. In Alderaan, it sounded like le. 3 letters. L-E-H. He set the letters in the frame. He applied ink, placed a sheet of paper, and pressed down with his hands, without a press. The press wasn't ready yet, just his hands, hard, evenly. He lifted the sheet. The word Lex was on the paper, crooked, slightly smudged on the right where he'd pressed harder, but legible, legible. He showed it to Thomas, took the sheet and stared at the word for a long time. Then he looked up. His lips were trembling. He said, "Do you understand what you've done?" Daniel said, 3 letters on bad paper. Thomas shook his head. "You've made a word that no hand has ever written, a word born of metal and oil and wood. That has never been in Alderaan. Never." Daniel looked at the sheet. 3 letters. L-E-X. Law. Yes, he thought. Perhaps Thomas is right. That's quite something. The press arrived 20 days later. Bernard brought it in pieces on a cart. It took half a day to assemble. The frame is heavy. Oak. It smells of fresh wood. The screw is thick and smooth. Bernard carved it like a work of art. The carving is even and deep. The lever is long for maximum pressure. The bottom plate is flat and polished. The top one slides on the guides. When the press was set up in the mill, Daniel just stood there looking at it for a few minutes. Beautiful. Rough by the standards of his world, but beautiful by the standards of this one. He assembled the press, set the first line, applied ink with a leather roller stuffed with wool, placed the sheet, lowered the plate, turned the screw. Pressure spread evenly across the entire surface. He lifted it, removed the sheet. The first real press. A line of 7 words. The Alderaan Land Code, Article 1. The letters were even, clear, identical, though not all were perfect. The third letter was slightly higher than the rest. The 5th word was slightly paler. The ink was thick in some places, thin in others, but the line was there, and it was legible, and it was uniform. If he had made another impression, he would have gotten the same line, exactly the same. That was the point, not the beauty, not the speed, the uniformity. Martha came over and looked. She wasn't crying this time. She just stood there looking at the sheet. Then she took it in her hands. Then she looked up at Daniel and said 2 words. Daniel. It works. Yes, he said, it works. Then he turned to the team. Thomas stood there, pale, his eyes wet. Gunter was grinning from ear to ear. Rick, who had been summoned from Otto's specifically for this day, stood by the wall and said nothing, but his fists were clenched, not out of anger, but out of excitement. Olaf sat crouched and staring at the floor. He understood too. Even Olaf, who wanted to go home, understood that going home was no longer an option. Because the world had just changed. Right here, in the old mill in the foothills. Daniel said, "This is the first print. It's bad. It's crooked. It's pale. But it's there. Tomorrow will be better. The day after tomorrow will be even better. In a month, we'll print 100 pages. In 2 months, 100 copies. And every copy will be the same. Word for word, letter for letter. One truth for all." He didn't know then that in 6 months, because of this print, he would be declared a heretic. That because of this press, the mill would be burned down. That because of these words, one of the people standing before him now would die. He didn't know. He just worked, as he had worked his whole life, detail by detail, letter by letter. That evening, after everyone had gone their separate ways, Martha came to him again. She brought a candle and sat down next to the press. She was silent. Then she asked, "You said that where you came from, machines like this have been around for a long time." Daniel nodded. "A very long time ago." She asked, "And what did they change?" Daniel thought, "How do you explain the history of the Reformation and the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution and industrialization to a woman from the late Middle Ages sitting in a mill by candlelight?" He said simply, "Everything. They changed everything." Martha was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Then those up there will be afraid of us." Daniel looked at her. A smart woman, very smart. She couldn't read, but she understood power better than any scholar. He said, "Yes, they will." Martha nodded. Then she said, calmly and evenly, "Then we need to be faster than their fear." For the next 2 months, Daniel typed, every day, from dawn to dusk, the Alderaan Land Code. Thomas dictated the text from memory. He didn't know the entire code by heart, but he remembered the key articles, on taxes, on land rights, on inheritance, on the courts, precisely those articles that the barons forged most often. Daniel set a page, printed 10 copies, disassembled the typeset, set the next one, 10 copies, disassembled, again and again. The work was slow, painfully slow. In the printing house of his world, a single typesetter could set a full page in an hour. Daniel needed 4. His fingers weren't used to the typesetting yet. The letters got mixed up. He had to catch the mistakes before printing because every ruined sheet was wasted paper, and paper was expensive. Thomas sat beside him and checked every line. His monastic training was invaluable here. An eye trained on letters. His hand was accustomed to the text. He saw the mistake before Daniel had even finished typing the line. Daniel was angry with himself. He knew how it was supposed to be. He saw in his mind's eye a perfect typewriter, with perfect letters and perfect paper. But in his hands, he held a crooked press with uneven letters and thick, rough paper that tore in places under the pressure. The gap between knowledge and reality. The most agonizing gap for an engineer. He knew he needed a better alloy, that he needed steel matrices, not copper ones, that he needed a steel screw, not a wooden one, that he needed paper 3 times thinner. But all of this required resources he didn't have, and time he didn't have either. By the end of the first month of printing, he had 30 pages of the codex, 10 copies of each, 300 sheets. By the end of the second month, 60 pages, 600 sheets. The full text of the main articles, 10 copies of the codex, not 100 as he had planned, 10. The paper ran out first. Otto rushed in new batches, but the wheel was acting up again, and production ground to a halt for a week. Daniel accepted what he had, 10 copies, enough to start with. He gathered a team. He laid out 10 stacks on the table. Each stack was a complete codex, 60 pages. Identical, word for word. Thomas checked every page, not a single mistake, not a single discrepancy, 10 identical books. If someone took 2 of them and compared them, they wouldn't find a difference. Daniel explained why this was important. In a world where every document is unique, forgery is simple. Scrape off a word, write another. Who's going to check? There is only one original. But if there are 10 originals, or 100, or 1,000, you can forge one. You can't forge them all. Multiplicity is a defense against lies. Thomas translated. The team was silent. Then Rick said it was a weapon. Daniel replied that it was a tool. Rick shrugged and said that every good tool is a weapon. The question is who holds it. The issue of distribution arose. 10 books lay on the table. How to get them to the people. Daniel didn't know the local roads or local customs. Martha did. She explained. There are fairs, 4 times a year in large villages and free towns. People come from all over the region. They trade, they exchange news. A fair is the place where information spreads the fastest. The nearest fair is in 2 weeks in Crossbridge, a large village on the highway, a 2-day journey. Daniel said okay, but you can't just hand out the books. You have to explain what they are. You need someone who will talk to people, explain, demonstrate, read aloud for those who can't. Martha said it shouldn't be Daniel. His accent would give him away as an outsider. People don't trust outsiders. It has to be someone from here, someone local, someone they trust. She looked at Thomas. Thomas turned pale, again. He understood what she was suggesting. To go out to the fair, to stand before the people, to hand out books, to read the law aloud, the very law that the peasants are being deceived by, in public, in front of everyone. It wasn't just a risk, it was a declaration of war against the order, against the barons, against everyone who clung to their monopoly on the word. Thomas said he was afraid. Daniel said he was doing the right thing. Anyone who isn't afraid doesn't understand the situation. Then he said Thomas wouldn't be alone. Rick would go with him for safety, and Martha. Martha for authority. Peasants trust peasants. Thomas was silent. He thought. Then he asked, "If they catch me?" Daniel answered honestly, "Then I'll print 10 more books and send someone else." And 10 more. And more. Until there are no more people or the fear ends. Thomas looked at him and said, "You are a cruel man, Daniel Reyes." Daniel replied, "No, I am honest. Cruel is the one who promises safety he cannot provide." Thomas nodded and agreed. 2 weeks later, Thomas, Rick, and Martha left for Crossbridge. They took 5 copies of the Codex with them. They left 5 at the mill. Daniel stayed behind. He couldn't go. His face was unfamiliar. His accent was foreign. His presence would have drawn attention. He stayed and continued working, typing up new pages. He printed additional sheets. He prepared the next batch. 3 days of waiting. The 3 longest days of his life on Alderaan. He slept for 4 hours and worked the rest of the time. Gunter and Olaf stayed with him. Gunter helped with the typesetting. The guy was a quick learner. His fingers were nimble and precise. 2 days later, he could typeset simple lines on his own, slowly but without mistakes. Olaf kept watch on the hill. He watched the road. He waited for their return or for trouble. They returned on the 4th day, without a single copy. All 5 were given away. Martha told the story quickly. The fair. Thomas stood on a crate by the market stalls. He began to read aloud. At first, 5 people listened, then 20, then 100. By the end, people stood in a circle and were silent. He read article after article, about taxes, about land rights, about the court. People listened and exchanged glances, because many of them were hearing what was written in the law for the first time in their lives. They knew only what the barons and village elders had told them, and now someone was reading the actual text to them, and the text said something different. The tax should be 1/10, not 1/5. Land is inherited in a direct line, not by the baron's decision. A court must have 2 witnesses, not just one appointed one. Simple things, written down long ago, always hidden. Thomas handed out 5 books. 5 villages received a copy each. The village elders accepted them with suspicion, but they accepted them, because the crowd was watching, because to refuse meant showing that you didn't want to know the law, and if you don't want to know the law, it means the law isn't in your favor. The logic is as clear as day. Martha said that one man at the fair asked where these books came from. Thomas replied that they were printed. The man didn't understand the word. Thomas explained, a machine that makes identical pages. The man asked who made the machine. Thomas said it didn't matter. What matters is that you have the law in your hands and it's real. The man took a book and left. Daniel listened and nodded. Good. So far, so good. So far, no one knows about the mill, about him, about the machine. 10 books are a stone thrown into water. Ripples will spread, and someone will start looking for the one who threw it. A week later, the first news arrived. Olaf brought it from the village where he'd gone for food. Baron Liddell, the very one, with a hastily drafted decree. He announced throughout his lands that the books at the fair were forgeries, written by heretics to sow discord. Whoever keeps such a book keeps heresy. The punishment? 3 years in the quarries. Daniel smirked. Predictable. The first reaction is always the same. Intimidate. Destroy. Pretend nothing ever happened. But the Baron was too late. The books were already in 5 villages. They had already been read aloud. They had already been discussed. You can burn a book, but you can't burn what people have memorized. The second piece of news came 3 days later. Worse. Much worse. The Order of the Bright Word. The main monastery. A 2-day journey north. The abbot had received one of the books. Not one of the 5 that had been distributed. A copy. Someone had hand-copied the codex from a printed copy and sent it to the monastery. The abbot compared the text with the original in the monastery's repository. The text matched, word for word. This meant the book was not a forgery. It was genuine. And for the abbot, this was more terrifying than any heresy, because if the text was genuine, it meant someone had gained access to the original. Or something else. Something the abbot could not explain. How could one person produce 10 identical books, with identical text, with identical letters, without a single difference? It was impossible. A single scribe cannot even write 2 identical pages. The hand gets tired. The eye loses its focus. The handwriting changes. And here there are 10 books, and all of them are identical. The abbot sent word to Bishop Marcus, the head of the Order of the Bright Word. the man who had kept the secret of Albrecht Voss in his private library. Daniel didn't know about Marcus. He didn't know about Voss. He didn't know that 200 years ago, in this very kingdom, someone had already tried to do the same thing and had been burned at the stake for it. He didn't know that his machine wasn't the first machine in Alderaan, only the second. He would find out about this later. For now, he stood in the mill, typing up another page of the codex, and thought about Martha. Martha was changing, slowly, imperceptibly to those who weren't watching closely. But Daniel was watching. Every evening after work, he would sit with her by the fire and teach her the letters. Not on paper. Paper was too expensive. On the wall, with charcoal. He wrote a letter and named it. Martha repeated it. Then he erased it and wrote it again, and again, and again. Martha learned slowly. She was angry with herself. She clenched her fists. She turned away so he wouldn't see her face. Daniel was silent and waited. Then he wrote the letter again. After 2 weeks, she knew the alphabet. After a month, she could make out simple words. Bread. Water, fire, name. Her name, Martha. When she first read her own name written on the wall, she stood there for a long time, staring. Then she ran her finger over the letters. Then she turned to him and said, 31 years. 31 years I lived without knowing what my name looked like. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had printed her an alphabet book, the first one in Alderaan. 20 pages, large letters, simple words. Bread, hearth, horse, night, house, river. He chose words she knew, words from her life, not from monastic Latin, not from palace documents, from the life of an innkeeper. Porridge, flour, guest, road, rain, morning. He bound the pages with linen thread. He made the cover from thick leather and gave it to her. Martha took the primer and was silent for a very long time. Then she opened the first page. She saw the word bread. She read it aloud, slowly, letter by letter. B, R, E, A, D, bread. She closed the primer, pressed it to her chest, and left. She didn't return until morning. In the morning, she came back with red eyes and without a single word about what had happened. But the primer was lying under her pillow. And every evening from that day on, she would sit alone by candlelight and read, slowly, running her finger along the lines, moving her lips. 31 years without letters. Now the letters were hers. No one could take them away. Not even the one who had taken everything else from her. Daniel watched this and felt that for this alone, it had been worth waking up in the mud on the road with a box of brass letters. For the sake of a single woman reading the word bread by candlelight. But there was no time for feelings. 3 days after the fair, a week after the Baron's decree, 10 days after the abbot sent word to Marcus, horsemen appeared on the road to the mill. There were 4 horsemen. Daniel saw them first because he was standing by the window cleaning the letters. Olaf on the hill had overslept. Or perhaps he hadn't overslept, but simply hadn't had time to run over. 4 horses trotted along the path toward the mill. The horsemen wore leather jackets. 2 had swords at their belts. 1 had a crossbow on his back. The 4th was unarmed but well-dressed. Not peasants, not soldiers, mercenaries. And whoever had hired them. Daniel acted on autopilot. The engineer's brain kicked in before the human brain had time to panic. 20 minutes. He told himself that as he rehearsed this moment in his head. 20 minutes to take the machine apart into pieces that couldn't be identified. The machine consisted of a press, a type case, and a bag of type. The press looked like a great press, thousands of them throughout the kingdom. The type case could be broken down into ordinary wooden slats. The type was the problem. Brass letters on little legs. Nothing like that existed in Alderaan. Anyone who saw the letters would understand everything. Daniel grabbed the bag of letters and looked around. Flour. Martha kept a supply of flour in a large bag by the wall. He untied the bag and buried the letters in the flour. He stirred it with his hand. The brass sank to the bottom, white powder on top. No one would go digging through the flour. He broke the inkwell with his knee. 3 dry clicks. The shards flew into the hearth. The fire consumed them in a minute. The ink stood in a pot. Daniel poured it into a bucket of slop. Black mixed with black. Indistinguishable. Fingerprints. 5 copies of the codex lay on the table. He grabbed them and shoved them into the same sack of flour. The paper would lie between the sack's wall and the flour, not visible from the outside. He left the press. A press is just a press. A grape press, olive, linen, whatever. Without letters and ink, the press proves nothing. 4 minutes. He finished in 4 minutes. Martha stood by the door and watched. She didn't interfere. She didn't ask. She just stood there and waited for him to finish. Then she opened the door. The horsemen were already at the mill. A well-dressed man dismounted first, of medium height, about 40 years old, a neat beard, eyes sharp and quick, a ring on his finger. Not a nobleman, a merchant. Daniel could tell that by his hands, soft hands, unaccustomed to hard labor, but not effeminate either. The hands of a man who counts money and writes promissory notes. The merchant surveyed the mill with a quick glance. The press, the hearth, the sacks, people. His gaze lingered on Daniel, on his clothes, on his face, then on the press. The merchant spoke. He addressed Martha. His voice was even and polite. No threat, no aggression, a businesslike tone. Thomas whispered the translation. The merchant said his name was Heinrich Stahl. He represented the Merchants' League of the Northern Route. He was looking for a man who made identical books. Martha replied that she didn't know what he was talking about. Heinrich Stahl smiled. He said that at the fair in Crossbridge, a certain young man had been handing out books, printed ones, not handwritten. The League was interested, not in a hostile way, commercially. The League paid the monasteries a tithe on every transaction for certifying documents. Tithe. From every one. That's thousands of gold pieces a year. If there's a way to produce documents without the monasteries, the League wants to know. Daniel listened and thought. The merchant wasn't lying. Or he was lying cleverly. The Merchants' League was truly suffocating under the monastery's monopoly. Daniel knew this from conversations with Martha and Thomas. Every contract, every promissory note, every agreement. Everything had to go through the order scribe and receive a seal. And for every seal, a tithe. The merchants hated this more than the peasants hated false decrees. But the merchants were pragmatists. They didn't rebel. They looked for workarounds. And now a workaround had presented itself. It came to them at the fair in the form of 5 identical books. Daniel stepped forward and spoke. His Alderanian was still broken, but sufficient. He said that the man with the books was his friend, that the books had been printed, that printing was a craft, not magic, and that he was ready to talk, but not here, and not with 3 armed men behind him. Heinrich Stahl looked at him for 10 seconds. Then he nodded. He waved to the mercenaries. They walked over to the horses. Heinrich sat down at the table across from Daniel. Martha brought water. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Daniel explained, carefully. Not everything. He described the principle, metal letters, typesetting, the press, the print, many copies. He didn't say where the blacksmith was, where the paper was, how many letters, how many people. Heinrich listened and asked questions, smart questions. Not about how the machine worked, about how much a single sheet cost, how long it took for 1 page, how many copies a day, what kinds of documents could be printed. Can bills of exchange be printed? Contracts? Invoices? Daniel answered honestly. A single sheet is cheap. Paper and ink. Typesetting takes 4 hours per page. Then printing is fast. 10 prints per hour, 100 a day with good paper. Any documents. Bills of exchange are possible. Contracts are possible. Any text. Henry was calculating in his head. Daniel could see it in his eyes. The merchant was multiplying and dividing and comparing. The cost of a monastery scribe versus the cost of a printed sheet, time versus time, and he liked the result. He liked it very much. Henry proposed a deal. The Merchants League provides the money, 50 silver marks, to start with. Daniel sets up a workshop in one of the free cities under the League's protection. He prints for the League, only for the League, exclusively. Daniel was silent. 50 marks. 4 years' worth of a craftsman's income, a huge sum of money. With that, he could build a real workshop, buy good metal, hire assistants, stop counting every sheet of paper. But the word exclusive stopped him. He asked Heinrich directly, "If I print only for the League, what will happen to the books for the peasants?" Heinrich smiled, with that smile that says the question is naive. He said the peasants don't pay, the League pays. That's how business works. Whoever pays gets the goods. Daniel shook his head. No, not exclusively. He would print for the League with pleasure, but he would also print for others, for anyone who asked, for money or for free. His press would not belong to a single owner. Heinrich stopped smiling. He looked at Daniel for a long time. Then he said, "Then 30 marks, and no exclusivity. But the League gets priority." Daniel said 25. The League gets priority on commercial orders. He prints non-commercial work whenever he wants and for whomever he wants. Heinrich haggled for another half hour. The result? 30 marks. The League gets priority. Daniel retains the freedom to print whatever he wants in his spare time. The League provides protection from the barons in the free cities. A handshake. Heinrich took a purse out of his bag and counted out 30 silver coins. He placed them on the table. He stood up. He said he would send a man in a month with the first order. He mounted his horse. He rode off with the mercenaries. Daniel looked at the 30 silver marks and felt the ground beneath his feet grow firmer. His first real money. His first real ally. His first real step from the mill towards something bigger. Martha walked over and looked at the silver, then at Daniel. She said, "You bargain like a merchant." Daniel replied, "I bargain like an engineer. A merchant wants profit. An engineer wants the machine to work, and the machine only works if it's free." Martha didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. 2 days later, the second piece of news arrived. Not from the merchants, from the order. Olaf brought a rumor from the village. Bishop Marcus had announced to all the monasteries in the kingdom that a heretic was active in the lands of Alderaan, a demonic scribe, one who multiplies the word without blessing, who breeds false doubles of the truth, poisoning the minds of the common folk with false texts. The order has offered a reward, 10 gold pieces for information, 20 for capture. The Grey Hoods, the order's Inquisition unit, specialists in the heresy of literacy. They were already on their way. Daniel listened and nodded. As expected. Faster than he'd hoped, but as expected. He looked at the team. Thomas was as white as a sheet. Gunther clenched his fists. Rick was sharpening a knife. Olaf kept glancing at the door, as if he were already about to run. Martha stood by the hearth, stirring the porridge with the expression of someone solving a problem. Daniel said, "We need to move. The mill is well known. Martha has been here before. The farmers from Quiet Ford know about this mill. If someone talks, and someone will talk, they'll find us in a week." Martha nodded. She had already thought of that. She knew the place. Further up in the mountains, an old quarry, abandoned 20 years ago when the stone ran out. A cave with a wide entrance and dry walls. A 2-hour walk from the nearest trail. No one goes there. They moved it at night. They took the press apart. Everyone carried their share. Martha carried a sack of flour, with letters on the bottom. Daniel carried the wooden parts of the press. Rick hauled the frame on his shoulders, alone. The oak beam weighed as much as a small anvil. Rick carried it in silence. 2 hours along a mountain trail in the dark. The quarry turned out to be better than Daniel had expected. A high, vaulted ceiling, a wide chamber, 3 side branches, a stream in the depths, and most importantly, it was invisible from the road. The entrance was concealed by a rocky outcrop and thick brush. They set up their things, assembled the press, built a fire deep inside so the smoke would escape through cracks in the rock rather than through the entrance. By dawn, the workshop was up and running again. A different cave, the same machine, the same people. Daniel realized something important at that moment. A machine is not a building. A machine is knowledge. You can burn a mill. You can destroy a workshop. But as long as the letters are intact and the people are alive, the machine exists. It can be assembled anywhere, in a cave, in a basement, in a forest hut. It is not a fortress that can be besieged. It is an idea that fits into a sack of flour. And that is precisely what the order feared most. A week later, in the quarry, Daniel began printing again. Faster now. Now with Heinrich Stahl's money. He sent Gunther to Jonas with 5 marks and an order for 200 new typefaces. He sent Olaf to Otto with 3 marks and an order for 1,000 sheets of paper. He hid the rest of the money. For a rainy day. A day rainier than this. Daniel spent 3 months in the quarry. The most productive and most dangerous 3 months in Alder. The Merchant League's money changed everything. Not because there was a lot of it, but because it turned the underground workshop from a desperate gamble into a functioning enterprise. Jonas sent 200 letters in 3 weeks. The quality improved. Lena improved the matrices. She came up with something Daniel hadn't suggested. She made not just 1 matrix per letter, but a set of 3. Large, medium, and small. 3 font sizes. When Daniel saw the first small letter, he sat down on a rock and was silent for a minute. It took him 2 months to explain the casting principle to the locals. It took Lena 3 weeks to develop that principle further than he had asked. She thought like an engineer. No, she thought better than an engineer. She thought like a master craftsman who has no textbooks, and therefore every solution is born from direct contact with the material. The paper from Otto had also improved. The old man found his rhythm. The water wheel was fully repaired, and now the rags were beaten 10 times faster. Rick turned out to be a good assistant. Quiet, strong, diligent. Otto said the guy worked for 2 and never complained. The sheets came out thinner and smoother, the sizing became consistent, the ink laid down cleanly. Daniel could now print 30 copies a day, 50 a month later. Gunther learned to set type on his own, slower than Daniel, but without mistakes. They worked in 2 shifts, Daniel from morning until noon, Gunther from noon until evening. Thomas checked every typeset before printing. 3 men, 1 press, 50 sheets a day, 1,500 a month. The first order from the Merchants League arrived a month later. Heinrich Stahl sent a messenger with a letter. The League wanted 500 copies of a standard trade contract, a form, with blank spaces for names and amounts. The rest was printed, the terms of the deal, the parties' rights, penalties for breach, witness's signature, everything that the monastery scribe used to write for a tithe of the sum. Daniel typeset the contract in a day, printed 500 copies in 10 days, sent them off with Gunther. Heinrich sent back another 20 marks and a new order, 300 blank invoices, 200 blank promissory notes, 100 blank receipts. The money started flowing, not like a river, but like a stream, steady, predictable. Daniel allocated it strictly, 1/3 for materials, 1/3 for people, 1/3 in reserve. Martha kept the books. She could already read numbers and simple words. Her primer was scribbled with notes. She wrote down expenses and income on the back page, crooked, in large letters, but accurately. Every coin accounted for. Daniel looked at her entries and saw more in them than just bookkeeping. He saw a woman who 3 months ago couldn't read her own name and now managed the finances of an underground workshop. The primer had worked. His machine had worked. Not the one that stood in the quarry, another one. The one that stood between Martha and the world that for 31 years had told her she was stupid. But alongside the money and the work, a threat was approaching. The Grey Hoods. Daniel learned about them bit by bit. From Olaf, who went to the villages for food. From Heinrich's messengers. from random travelers whom Martha questioned on the roads. The Grey Hoods, it wasn't just a name, it was a description. Monks in grey hoods, inquisitors of the order, specialists in a single kind of heresy, the heresy of literacy. In Alderaan, there was an underground of people who secretly taught children to read. They were called readers. They stole pages from monastery libraries, copied them by hand, hid them in secret stashes, taught in basements. They had been caught and burned for 100 years. The Grey Hoods were created precisely for this, not to hunt witches or demons, to hunt letters. They were led by Brother Jeremiah. Daniel first heard that name from Thomas. Thomas knew of him from the monastery. Jeremiah was a legend of the order, educated, intelligent, well-read. He knew theology better than any bishop. He wrote 3 treatises on the nature of the word and its sacred inviolability. He sincerely believed that literacy without spiritual guidance leads to chaos, and he acted on that belief, methodically, quietly, without public burnings. He would come to the village, talk. He listened. He found those who hid books. He took the books. Sometimes he took people. People were sent to monastic cells for penance, not for execution. Jeremiah did not kill. He re-educated. That was worse, because people emerged from his cells broken, convinced that reading without a blessing was a sin, that letters belonged to God and the order, not to mere mortals. Thomas spoke of this with the horror of a man who understood the mechanism from the inside. He himself had been a novice. He himself had believed in the sacredness of the word. He himself had left the order, but a part of the order remained within him. And Jeremiah was the embodiment of that part, the voice that said Daniel was wrong, that the machine was evil, that letters made of metal have no soul. Daniel listened to Thomas and thought. Then he asked, "Do you believe Jeremiah is right?" Thomas was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I believe that he believes, and that makes him more dangerous than any mercenary. A mercenary can be bought. A fanatic can be deceived. But an intelligent believer who acts out of conviction rather than malice, you can't stop someone like that with money or lies." Daniel nodded. A familiar type. In his world, such people existed too. Those who sincerely believe they know better, that restriction is protection, that freedom is dangerous. They aren't evil, they're convinced. And that's exactly why they're so difficult to deal with. The Grey Hoods were moving slowly but surely. Olaf was spreading the news. Monks in grey hoods had been spotted in 3 villages around Crossbridge. They were asking about the fair, about the young man who read aloud, about books. Thomas grew nervous. If they found him, they'd find the mill too, or rather, the quarry. Daniel reassured him. They wouldn't find the quarry. The mill, maybe. That's why they'd left it. But people knew Thomas by sight. He'd been reading at the fair. Hundreds of people saw him. If the Grey Hoods put out a description of him, someone would remember. They had to solve Thomas's problem. Daniel solved it the way he solved engineering problems, systematically. If the problem was that Thomas had been seen, then they needed to make sure he wasn't seen anymore. Not hide him. No. Multiply. He printed a flyer, 1 page, in large print. The text read, "We are the ones who read aloud. There are many of us. We are everywhere. We read the law for those who cannot read for themselves. We are not heretics. We are citizens. Seek us out and you will find 1,000. Burn 1,000 and 10,000 will rise." He printed 300 copies. He distributed them through Heinrich Stahl's network to the free towns and villages of the northern route. The effect was immediate. In 4 villages the following week, different people gathered in the town squares and began reading aloud. Not Daniel's books, just decrees, just laws, just texts that hung on the walls of town halls and that no one had ever read aloud for those who could not read for themselves. The Grey Hoods couldn't arrest everyone. 1 person reading aloud is a heretic. 20 people reading aloud in different places is a movement, and you can't lock a movement in a cell. Brother Jeremiah understood this, and he changed his tactics. Instead of looking for Thomas, he began looking for the source. Not the reader, but the machine. Not the voice, but the press. He knew that somewhere there was a machine. The books were identical. The letters were identical. This wasn't a manuscript. It was something else. He didn't know exactly what, but he knew it existed and that it stood somewhere, and it took up space, and it smelled, and it made noise. Jeremiah began searching by scent, by ink. Oil-based ink smells different from water-based ink. Jeremiah knew this because he knew books better than anyone in the kingdom. He picked up one of the printed sheets, sniffed it, rubbed it between his fingers, and realized the ink was oil-based, not monastic, homemade, made from linseed oil and soot. Linseed oil is boiled flaxseed oil. Flaxseed oil means flax. Flax means flax fields. Flax fields mean a specific region. He narrowed his search. Daniel found out about this from Heinrich 3 weeks later. The merchant sent a warning. The Grey Hoods were questioning the oil producers. They were looking for anyone who had bought large quantities of linseed oil in recent months. Daniel went cold. He had been buying oil through Olaf, in 2 villages, from different merchants. But if Olaf were identified and the purchases linked to the route, the trail would lead to the quarry. He made his decision in a minute. No more personal purchases, only through the League. Heinrich Stahl could supply the oil through his trading network, mix it in with regular commercial shipments. 1 barrel of oil among 100 barrels, a needle in a haystack. Heinrich agreed, for an extra markup, of course. Daniel paid. Safety costs money. But he had already left one trail, and Jeremiah was following it, slowly, methodically, like a man who knows time is on his side. During those same 3 months, something else happened. Quiet, imperceptible against the backdrop of money and danger. But for Daniel, perhaps the most important thing. One evening he sat by the fire and wrote new words from Martha with charcoal on a stone. She sat across from him and read them aloud, slowly, confidently. She was no longer angry with herself. She had learned the patience that reading teaches, letter by letter, word by word. She read the word night. Then she looked up and said, "I want to tell you something." Daniel listened. Martha spoke softly. She told him about her husband. His name was Alec. He had gone off to the Baron's War 4 years ago. He never came back. They sent her his coat and a locket. 12 silver coins were sewn into the coat, the very ones that she had given to Daniel. Alec couldn't write. He hadn't left her a letter, not a single word. For 4 years, Martha had lived with emptiness, with the silence of a man who had left and couldn't say anything in farewell. Not because he didn't want to, because he couldn't. The letters didn't belong to him. They belonged to the monastery. And the monastery didn't give him the words. Martha fell silent. Then she said, "That's why I put his money toward your car. Not for the sake of the law, not for the sake of the peasants. So that the next soldier who goes to war can write his wife a single line. Just one." Daniel was silent. What could he say? He reached out and took her hand, a rough, calloused, hot hand. Martha didn't pull her hand away. They sat like that by the fire until the candle burned out. Then Martha stood up and went to her room. Nothing happened, and everything happened. In the 4th month, Sora Khan appeared at the quarry. She came alone, at night, soaked and dirty, in a thin nun's habit and with a leather bag pressed to her chest. Olaf nearly chopped her down with an axe as she approached. Martha stopped him at the last moment. The girl knelt in the mud and looked at them with huge black eyes, thin, pale, with long, ink-stained fingers, just like Thomas's, only thinner. She spoke, quickly, rambling. Thomas listened and paled in his usual way. Then he translated for Daniel. Sora Han, 19 years old. Daughter of the monastery scribe Kim Han. 3 generations ago, the Han family came from the eastern trade route and settled in Alderaan. Kim Han was the order's finest calligrapher. His manuscripts were considered the gold standard. His daughter grew up in the monastery library surrounded by books. She had been reading since she was 4. By 19, she knew 300 texts by heart: theology, law, medicine, agronomy. 300 books in one mind. She ran away a week ago. The reason was simple and terrible. She saw her father forge a charter. The abbot had ordered it. A land dispute between 2 barons. The original charter granted the disputed territory to one. The abbot wanted to give it to the other, because the other paid more. Kim Han scraped off one baron's name and wrote the others, with his beautiful hand, with his flawless handwriting. And no one would have noticed, because a forgery made by the world's best calligrapher is indistinguishable from the original. Sora stood behind the door and watched. Her father didn't see her. She left that very night, with a bag containing her notes, 10 notebooks, her whole life, poems she had written in secret, notes on books. Thoughts, questions, everything that didn't fit within the confines of monastic life. She had heard of the nameless printer. The rumor had even reached the convent. Someone was printing books without a blessing. Someone was making identical pages out of metal and oil. She walked for a week, asked around cautiously, found the village where Olaf bought food, followed him, arrived. Daniel listened and assessed. The girl was either incredibly brave or incredibly desperate, or both. Her knowledge was priceless. 300 books by heart. That meant she didn't need the originals. She was a library herself, a walking library from which one could print. But she was also a danger. The daughter of a monastery scribe who had run away from the order. If they were looking for her, and they surely were, the trail led straight here. He asked, "Who knows you're gone?" Sora replied, "My father. He woke up when I was leaving. He saw. He didn't stop me. He just stood in the doorway and watched, and didn't say a word." Daniel understood. A father who forges documents and a daughter who runs away because she can't bear to watch. A father who doesn't stop her because he knows she's right, but who doesn't go with her either because he has nowhere to go but the monastery. He took Sora in. Martha gave her dry clothes and hot porridge. Sora ate greedily. Then she fell asleep by the fire and slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, she was a different person. Quiet, focused, with sharp eyes that noticed everything. She saw the typesetting machine and walked over to it silently. She examined it for a long time. She touched the letters. She took them out of the tray and put them back. Then she turned to Daniel and said that the typesetting was wrong. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Sora explained, "The letters are distributed evenly, 5 of each. But in the Alderaan language, letters occur with varying frequency. The letter E appears 3 times more often than the letter G. The letter A appears twice as often as the letter U. If you're typesetting a long text, the more frequent letters will run out first, and you'll have to dismantle lines you've already set to free up unnecessary letters. You need to cast more of the common letters." She named the frequency of each letter, from memory. The 300 books she knew by heart had given her an intuitive understanding of language statistics. Daniel looked at her and thought of Claude Shannon, of information theory, of frequency analysis. This 19-year-old girl from a medieval had just explained to him the basics of what in his world would be called linguistic statistics. No jargon, no formulas, simply because she had read 300 books and remembered every word. He told Lena, through Gunter, the messenger, a new order, letters by frequency, 20 E's, 15 A's, 12 O's, and so on down Sora's list. Lena didn't ask why. She just typed away. Sora got to work immediately. She began typing the text in Daniel's place, and she typed twice as fast. Her fingers knew the letters like a pianist knows the keys. She didn't have to search for a letter in the typewriter. She knew where each one was. 3 days later, She rearranged the entire typewriter according to her own system. Frequent letters in the center, rare ones at the edges. Typing speed increased by another third. Daniel stepped away from the typewriter. For the first time in months, he wasn't typing himself. Sora did it better. He could focus on other things, on engineering, on improving the press, on ink, on new projects. The first project came from Sora. A week later, she approached him and said she wanted to print a medical treatise. She knew 3 medical texts by heart, on treating wounds, on childbirth, on herbs. Peasants are dying from things that can be cured, festering wounds, complicated births, poisoning. The knowledge exists. It lies in the monastery libraries. The monks know, and they don't share, because medicine is also a monopoly. Want to cure a child? Go to the monastery. Pay. Daniel said yes, but first the codex. The codex comes first, then medicine. Sora nodded. She knew how to wait. 300 books in her head teach patience. 2 weeks after Sora's arrival, Emily Carter appeared. She didn't come. She materialized. One morning, Daniel woke up to find an unfamiliar woman sitting in the quarry, drinking his tea. 26 years old, short-cropped red hair, freckles, a narrow face, quick eyes that assessed everything and everyone with the professional precision of a fence. She introduced herself, Emily Carter, a former orphan, a traveling saleswoman. She carried needles, ribbons, and contraband books from village to village. She knew all the roads, all the smugglers, all the secret paths. She came on business, not out of idealism, out of commerce. She had seen printed sheets at the fairs. She did the math in her head. 1 printed sheet was worth a copper coin to Daniel. A handwritten monastery sheet was worth a silver coin, a 20-fold difference. She wanted to sell, not give away, sell, at a price not half the price of the monasteries. 10 copper coins per sheet, a profit of 9 copper coins per sheet. At 100 sheets a day, that's 900 copper coins, or 9 silver marks, a day. Daniel listened to her calculations and realized he was looking at Alderon's first marketer. Crude, cynical, but precise. She saw what he didn't see. He thought about knowledge and justice. She thought about money and the market. Both were necessary. He told her his condition. The code for the peasants is free. That's non-negotiable. She can sell everything else. Commercial orders, forms, contracts, flyers, anything. Emily shrugged. A free code is advertising, she said. Good advertising. People will see the free version and come for the paid one. She was right. Within a month, Emily had built a distribution network covering 12 villages and 3 free towns. Both the free codes and the paid orders went through her. She knew every innkeeper on the northern route, every bandit, every innkeeper who would let her leave a stack of sheets under the counter. The money started flowing in faster. But along with the money came something else. Daniel found out about it through Emily. One of the buyers in the free city of Halberg used a printed form to forge a promissory note. The printed form looked so official that the merchant accepted it without checking. The swindler received 50 marks worth of goods and vanished. The first crime involving printed text in the history of Alderon. Daniel found out and sat down against the wall of the quarry. He stared at the machine for a long time. A tool. Just a tool. With a hammer, you can drive a nail or kill a man. With a knife, you can cut bread or slit a throat. With a press, you can print a law or print a forgery. He had given people a tool. He couldn't control what they did with it. Emily stood nearby, smoking a pipe. She said calmly, "Welcome to reality, Daniel. You thought the press was only light. No. The press is light and shadow at the same time, and the shadow will grow along with the light." Daniel didn't answer. He thought. Then he said, "We need a verification system, a watermark, or a seal, something that distinguishes a genuine document from a forgery." Emily raised an eyebrow. How ironic, she said. You ran from the monastery's seal, and now you're making your own. Daniel grimaced. She was right, but there was no choice. Winter came to the quarry with cold and silence. Snow covered the paths. Traffic slowed. Messengers came less often. Orders came once every 2 weeks instead of once a week. But the work didn't stop. Daniel used the winter for what engineers always use forced downtime for improvement. He took the press apart and reassembled it. He replaced the wooden screw with an iron one. 5 marks to Jonas for the work. The iron screw provided twice the output with the same amount of force. The prints became sharper, more even. The ink laid down without any bald spots. He improved the cash register. Instead of 1 frame, he made 3.
While one was in the press, the second was already set and waiting its turn. The third was being disassembled and reset. A conveyor belt. Primitive, but it worked. The printing speed increased to 80 sheets a day. Sora set the type, Gunter printed, Daniel monitored quality, Thomas proofread the texts. 4 people, 1 machine, 3 cash registers, 80 sheets. Martha kept the books and ran the office. Emily came and went. She showed up with money and orders. She would disappear for a week. She would return with news and new routes. Olaf kept watch. Rick was at Otto's paper mill. That winter, Daniel printed the first almanac. The idea was simple. 1 book, 100 pages. Everything a peasant needs to live. Section 1. Law. The main articles of the code on taxes, land, and the courts. Section 2. Medicine. Sora dictated from memory. Treatment of festering wounds. Midwifery. Poisonous and medicinal herbs. Section 3. Agronomy. Thomas recalled the monastery treatise on crop rotation and yield. When to sow, when to harvest, which soils are suitable for what. Section 4. Arithmetic. Simple calculations. Addition. Subtraction. How to calculate the area of a field. How to verify the correctness of a tax calculation. 100 pages. Everything the monasteries had kept under lock and key. Everything that had been worth tens of gold pieces in manuscript form. Everything that now fit into a book worth 3 copper coins. Daniel spent 2 months printing the almanac. By the end of winter, he had 50 copies. 50 identical books. He bound them himself. Sora helped. Her slender fingers sewed with linen thread faster than he could keep track of. Each book received a cover made of thin leather. On the cover was imprinted a star with 8 rays, the workshop's emblem. Daniel had come up with it in a minute and didn't think much of it. Sora said the star was the light of knowledge. Emily said the star was a good logo. Martha said nothing but ran her finger over the imprint on the cover and smiled. 50 almanacs went out with Emily in the first week of spring. She distributed them through her network. 10 for free, 40 for money. 3 copper coins apiece. The money from the sales covered the cost of materials and yielded a small profit. But the main thing wasn't the money. The main thing was what happened afterward. A month later, Emily returned with news. In the village of Westermark, a peasant came to the Baron with an almanac in his hands. He opened the page with the land law. He pointed his finger at the article. He said that the tax should be 1/10, not 1/5. The Baron threw him out. The peasant went to the Free City and filed a complaint with the magistrate. With the book in his hands, the magistrate accepted it. For the first time in Alderon's history, a peasant sued a baron with the text of the law in his hands. He lost. Of course, the court was rigged. But he sued, and word got out, and other peasants learned that they could sue, that the law exists, that it is written, and that it could be read. In another village, a midwife read the section on childbirth in the almanac. A week later, she saved a woman in labor who would have died without that knowledge. The baby survived. The mother survived. The midwife went to Officer Emily and asked for another book. For the neighboring village, where the midwife is old and blind and does everything from memory, but her memory isn't what it used to be.
Daniel listened to these stories and said nothing. Then he went back to the lathe and continued working. What can you say? The machine is working. Not the press, another machine. The one that stands between knowledge and the person who needs it. But winter brought something else as well. News about the Grey Hoods. Jeremiah hadn't been idle. He found the oil maker from whom Olaf had bought flaxseed oil in the early months. The oil maker described the buyer. Young, red-haired, nervous. Olaf. Jeremiah got a lead. Southwest of Crossbridge, the mountains. He narrowed the search area down to 3 valleys. Daniel learned of this from Heinrich Stahl. The merchant had sent a messenger with a single word. Leave. Daniel did not leave. He could not. 50 copies of the almanac were only the beginning. Orders from the League were pouring in. Paper from Otto was pouring in. Letters from Jonas and Lena were pouring in. Everything was finally working. Leaving now would mean losing months of work. He decided otherwise. If you can't run from a problem, solve it. Problem. Jeremiah is looking for a workshop. Solution. Let him look. But let him find more than one. Daniel wrote to Heinrich. We need 3 spaces in 3 different locations. Basements. Sheds. Anything. With the smell of oil and soot. With scraps of paper on the floor. With a wooden frame resembling a press. Empty workshops. Traps for the sleuth. Henry understood and appreciated the plan. 2 weeks later, 3 fake workshops were ready. In an abandoned barn to the west. In the basement of a tavern to the east. In a fisherman's shed on the coast. Each smelled of linseed oil. Each looked like a place where someone had been working recently and left in a hurry. Jeremiah found the first one a week later. Daniel found out from Emily. The Grey Hoods had broken into the barn. They found remnants of ink, scraps of paper, a broken frame, and no one there. Jeremiah examined everything, at length, carefully, and he realized he'd been tricked. Daniel knew Jeremiah would figure it out. He was too smart to be fooled for long. But it bought them time, a week, maybe 2. Every false lead was time, and time was sheets, 80 a day. While Jeremiah was checking the fake workshops, Daniel was printing. By mid-spring, what Daniel had been waiting for and fearing happened. Isabella Voigt came to the quarry, not alone, with a letter. 28 years old, tall. Dark hair pulled back tightly, a beautiful, cold face, travel clothes but made of fine fabric, a dagger at her belt, a trunk on her horse, an aristocrat, Count Voigt's daughter, the youngest, unwanted, destined to be the wife of Baron Liddell, that very one, with a decree in hand, the one that started it all. She ran away the day before the wedding. The letter was from the Underground Union of Readers, a recommendation, brief. We vouch for the bearer of this letter. She is our friend and yours. Daniel read the letter and looked at Isabella. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is assessing and not yet impressed. She began to speak, in 4 languages, first in Alderon, then she switched to an Eastern dialect, testing to see if anyone knew it. Sora raised her head. She knew it. Isabella nodded to her. Then she spoke in a Southern dialect. No one understood. Then in the trade lingua franca. Emily understood. Isabella settled on Alderon and said she wasn't here because she believed in the seal. She was here because she believed in the word, and because her whole life she'd been told that silence was beautiful. Daniel replied, No one here is silent. Here they write. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Then she asked what she could do. Daniel said, You know the court. You know politics. You know who owes whom, who hates whom, and who sleeps with whom. Write about it. Anonymously. A pamphlet. An expose. The truth that everyone knows but no one speaks aloud. Isabella looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down at the table. She asked for paper and a pen, and she wrote all night. By morning, Daniel had a 12-page pamphlet,
about the marriage politics of the Tune of Alderaan, about how daughters are sold for land, how women are deprived of their inheritance, how marriage contracts are drawn up without the bride's knowledge and kept in monasteries where she cannot read them. The text was brilliant, vicious, precise, every word like a dagger thrust. Not hysteria, not a complaint, facts, names, dates, sums, who betrothed whom, how much was paid, what was received. Daniel printed 200 copies in 5 days. Emily took them. Within 2 weeks, half the capital was reading the pamphlet, anonymously, without a name. But those in the know recognized the Count's daughter's style, and they kept quiet, because every word was true. Baron Liddell learned that his former fiancée was now writing about him. His fury was heard throughout the north. He doubled the reward for the nameless printer, 20 gold pieces, a fortune. Daniel smirked when he found out. His price was rising. That meant he was doing things right. Spring was gaining strength, and with it, Daniel was gaining strength. The team had grown, the workshop was running, money was coming in. But Daniel knew that the quarry was a dead end. You can't build a future in a cave. You need a city. You need protection. You need legality. Or at least semi-legality. He discussed this with Heinrich Stahl at their next meeting. The merchant had come in person. He inspected the workshop. For the first time, he saw the machine in action. He stood and watched as Sora types a page in 3 minutes. As Gunther places a sheet and turns the screw. As the sheet emerges from under the press with smooth black lines. Heinrich was silent for 5 minutes. Then he said, "You need Grimsholm." Grimsholm was the largest free city on the northern route, 15,000 inhabitants, a trading port on the river, a magistrate independent of the barons, a merchant's guild stronger than the local nobility, its own guard, its own laws, its own walls. In Grimsholm, the order had a monastery, but no authority. The magistrate tolerated the monks, but did not obey them. The city lived by trade, and trade was its only religion. Heinrich made a concrete proposal. The League would rent a space in the commercial district, a large one, with 2 rooms, one for work, the second for storage. The League pays the rent. The League would provide security. The League would negotiate with the magistrate. In return, Daniel would open the first public workshop, not an underground one, an open one, with a sign, with a door to the street. Daniel listened and weighed the risks. An open workshop is a target. Anyone can come and see. Anyone can report it. But an open workshop in a free city under the guild's protection is also a fortress, because the order cannot storm Grimsholm without the magistrate's consent, and the magistrate won't give consent because the League pays the magistrate more than the order. Money versus faith. In a free city, money wins. Daniel agreed. The move took 2 weeks, the most difficult move of his life. The workbench was taken apart. The letters were packed into 3 sacks, the paper into bales, the ink into barrels. Everything was loaded onto 2 carts. Martha rode in the first one, Daniel in the second. The rest walked. Emily went ahead to prepare the premises. A 3-day journey, on the roads, out in the open, with cargo that could be explained any way they wanted. Barrels of oil, sacks of metal, bales of cloth. No one would think to check. They arrived in Grimsholm on the 4th day. The city struck Daniel as a revelation after months in the cave. Stone walls, paved streets, 2- and 3-story houses, a bustling, colorful market, people of different classes and nationalities, Eastern merchants, Southern sailors, Northern craftsmen. Grimsholm was a crossroads, a place where the world mingled and asked no permission. The premises were on Blacksmith Street, a 2-story house with a stone first floor and a wooden second, a large hall downstairs. It used to be a coppersmith's workshop. The walls were sooty, the floor was stone, the ceiling was high, perfect. Daniel assembled the machine in half a day. By evening, it was working. The first print in Grimsholm came out smooth and crisp, the best of all he had ever made. Perhaps because the light from the large windows fell on the printing press, and for the first time in months he saw the letters without torches or candles. Bernard made the sign. That same carpenter. He had come with them. An oak board with carved letters. Workshop of the Free Word. Daniel had wanted simply printing shop, but Isabella insisted. She understood the power of words better than he did. The next day, the first curious onlookers came to the door. Grimsholm was a town of artisans. A new workshop was an event. People peered. They saw the machine. They didn't understand what it was. They asked questions. Sora explained, patiently, calmly, to everyone. Metal letters, set in a frame. Paper, press, imprint, identical every time. The reaction was the same too. First, disbelief, then curiosity, then silence, then a question. And any text is possible. Yes, any text. A week later, the first private customer came to the workshop, an innkeeper. He wanted 20 sheets with the menu, all identical, to hang in the dining room and hand out to regulars. Daniel printed them in a day. The innkeeper paid 5 copper coins and left happy. 2 days later, a potter came. He wanted sheets listing the prices of his wares. 3 days later, a weaver. He wanted a sale announcement. A week later, the line of customers stretched out the door. Grimsholm grasped the printing press faster than the villages did. The city thrived on trade. Trade thrived on information. And information now cost 20 times less. The were the first. Then came the artisans. Then the city officials. The magistrate ordered 300 copies of the city charter. For the first time in history, every resident of Grimsholm could obtain a copy of the law by which their city lived. Daniel printed and thought about how this was exactly how it worked in his world. The printing press did not conquer illiteracy from above. It seeped in from below, through menus, through price tags, through advertisements, through the little things of everyday life. People began to read not because they were told to, but because it became to their advantage. But the workshop on Mednikov Street became visible to everyone, including those for whom it was like a knife in the heart. 2 weeks after the opening, a monk came to the workshop, in a gray hood, alone, without guards, of medium height, about 50 years old, a narrow, intelligent face, light, calm eyes, hands behind his back. He stood in the doorway and looked at the press for a long time. Sora was ringing up a sale. She looked up and saw the gray hood, and her fingers froze over the register. Daniel was standing by the press and knew immediately who it was. Not by the hood, by the look. It was the look of a man who was looking at something he had long known in theory and was seeing for the first time in reality. Not surprise, not fear. Recognition. Brother Jeremiah, inquisitor of the gray hoods, hunter of the heresy of literacy, the man who had been tracking Daniel for 4 months, and found him. Not in a cave, not in a basement, in a workshop with a sign on the main street of the free city. Jeremiah spoke. His voice was even, soft, polite. He said he had seen Daniel's work. He had read the codex. He had read the almanac. He had read the pamphlet. He had read everything carefully, and he hadn't come to arrest him. He was in a free city. He had no authority here. He had come to understand. Daniel offered him a seat. Jeremiah sat down. Martha brought water. Jeremiah thanked her. The conversation lasted 4 hours, the most difficult conversation of Daniel's life in Alderaan. Jeremiah didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't curse. He asked questions, smart questions, questions to which Daniel had no simple answers. Jeremiah asked, "You give people letters, but do you give them the wisdom to read correctly? A peasant will read the law and understand it in his own way, incorrectly, and he will go and rebel, not for the truth, for his own understanding of the truth, which may be false." Daniel replied, "Monks read the law and also understand it in their own way. The difference is that there is only one monk, but there are thousands of peasants. 1,000 understandings are closer to the truth than one." Jeremiah shook his head. 1,000 understandings are 1,000 disputes. 1,000 conflicts, 1,000 reasons for bloodshed. A single interpretation is peace. Imperfect, unjust, but peace. Daniel said, "A world built on ignorance is not a world. It is a prison where the prisoners do not know they are imprisoned." Jeremiah replied, "And a world built on knowledge without wisdom is a fire in which everyone will burn, thinking they are warming themselves." Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations.